I'm Manuel Medrano. I'm Environmental Services Manager for the city of Chula Vista. I'm also humbled to have been selected to be a commissioner on the California Statewide Commission on Recycling Markets and Curbside Recycling. So important work to do, a very large economy, and we were given a tight deadline, but we were fortunately able to extend it a little bit. So next slide. So in 2019, then California Assembly member Susan Talamantes Eggman, she's now a senator, introduced AB 1583, which was signed by the governor and required the state to convene a stakeholder group, or in this case, a commission, with members of varying recycling expertise. So this commission was formed in the summer, and actually convened and started having meetings in the summer of 2020. And you can see there the link if you wanted to stay informed with what's going on with this commission, and I'll come back again within this presentation. You see the link right there to stay involved and stay informed of what's going on. Next slide, please. So the purpose and the committees and the timeline you can see there, but the first purpose was to issue policy recommendations to achieve market development goals. And that was assigned to the Market Development Committee, which was formed, and I happen to be part of that committee. Also, number two, identifying products that are recyclable and compostable. And actually that's two committees are looking into that, organics, the Organics Committee and the Recycling Committee. And then also we're tasked with providing regular feedback to Cal Recycle on messaging designed to encourage proper recycling, the right cycling as we call it, not wish cycling, and the messages that are being sent. And that's part of the Label Media and Education Committee. So you see the timeline there. We were tasked, we were convened in the summer of 2020. And by January 1st, we were tasked with developing a full recommendation. So fortunately, again, Susan Talamantes Eggman authored and passed, helped pass the additional assembly bill there that gave us an additional 6 months, which will be better there. And then again, there's also other states that have convened similar commissions that have taken several years to provide recommendations. So there was a bit of an aggressive deadline. And in addition to the committees, if I may go back to that part, is that there are other two commissioner work groups that have been formed on extended producer responsibility, potential fee adoptions, household hazardous waste, reuse, and waste prevention. So those are groups the two member groups that will be providing additional policy recommendations at the end of or in July of this year. Next slide, please. So there's a list of the commissioners. The chair was voted on, selected was Heidi Sanborn, formerly with California Product Stewardship Council, now with National Stewardship Action Council. The co-chair, Richard Valle, a CEO of a recycling company, larger recycling company in the Bay Area. You could see a good list there from unions to local jurisdiction representatives like myself and other members that you see in there representing trash companies, hauler companies, and recycling companies as well. Some of those names you'd be more likely to recognize as members of a California Resource Recovery Association and fellow zero wasters. Next slide, please. So the role of the commission, again, is to provide the policy recommendations to achieve market development goals, and also identify products that are recyclable, compostable, pursuant to the resource, the section there of the Public Resources Code. Next slide, please. Another purpose or another role is to update the recommendations to CalRecycle regularly, and also to give the normal regular feedback. So it's not just a one-year commitment. There's additional time that we have to be able to provide these recommendations and feedback if those recommendations need to be amended or in any way other information added. Next slide, please. So again, to meet our market development goals, we need to make sure we provide recommendations to increase the demand for post-consumer material. Also increased demand for recycled content products. That's very important. High yield quality feedstocks. It's also very important to make sure that they're not contaminated, that their products are going to be coming back to the recycling, to the repurpose and reuse loop as much as possible. And then also competitive collection of these materials as well. Next slide, please. And again, the policies that we need to recommend need to help the state meet its requirement. Unfortunately, we know that the target of 75% by 2020 was not met, but so we continue to provide the feedback and work on that. But something very important, depending on what side of the zero waste spectrum you are on, is these recommendations should not establish or enforce any additional or a recycling rate to any city or county greater than 50% diversion. So this is just to make sure that these recommendations are statewide and not affecting the local cities and counties, local jurisdictions. Next slide. And again, this has been a main focus, I would say, of this symposium, helping meet methane emission reduction goals. Again, we didn't meet the 50% reduction by 2020, and then the 75% reduction by 2025. It's a lofty goal. I think I'm optimistic that we could do it. Perhaps others don't think so, but I'm hoping that we could do this, and we're poised to do it. Next slide. So again, what we're recommending is what products are recyclable or compostable, and based on the definitions of this bill, this Senate bill, and determining the type of food service packaging, making sure that's reusable, recyclable, or compostable, and again providing regular feedback again to CalRecycle on helping minimize contamination on curbside programs. Next, please. Next slide. So on to the first committee, and the committee that I belong to. Again, this is per the recommendations that we provided on January, preliminary recommendations. I encourage you to go to the page. I'll go back to that page where you'll see the links. If not, you could just any easy search on California Market or Recycling Commission, and you'll probably see that in many searches. So next slide. So this committee, the Market Development Committee, again, tasked with making sure that we increase market demand for the post-consumer material and demand for recycled content products, and promoting efficient local waste diversion programs. So among what somewhat already has been said on previously. Next slide. So I think this is a repeat of, unfortunately, of the last. If we could go to the next slide. There we go. So the preliminary recommendations. Number one is expanding the state's agency buy recycle campaign. The state of California, we purchase an enormous amount of goods and services. So why not lead by example, making sure that they're buying products that are repairable, recyclable, and that have high recycling content. Sorry. So definitely lead by example, and the state could be leading that charge. Also activating the consolidated permitting process for facilities, something that it's in code. It's been in the books for decades, but really never looked at and scrutinized to make sure to help local facilities site and or expand if need be. And also working with, or a third specific recommendation, this is just one of many, working with GOBIZ, or the Governor's Office of Business Economic Development. I think they're critical to help us expand markets and help provide the resources needed to encourage this type of activity, this type of market development. And so we're asking for that, and we're asking for additional funding to be able to fund, to provide either grants or additional loans through the Recycling Market Development Zone Program, additional money to be able to offer these operations. Next slide, please. So the Organics Committee, next slide. They're tasked with some of the goals that to make sure that we address the impacts of compostable packaging, increase food rescue, Infrastructure capacity. I know we're in a deficit of how much infrastructure we need in the state to comply, not only with SB 1383, but to be able to provide good products, good end products with organics. And then also developing the procurement and of organic products as well. Next slide. So these are two of the already approved recommendations that are at this point not final, but they're still have been sent as a preliminary recommendation to Cal Recycle, is developing a food rescue policy proposal. And the second one is really interesting, and as Bob Hill from Medco mentioned, with some of the plastics and other contaminants that could go into our anaerobic digesters and our composting programs and systems. The precautionary principle that, banning PFAS from foodware, that's something that it's going to be a recurring problem. We need to make sure we fix it if it's potential for harm. It shouldn't be allowed in our food system. So, and because eventually we'll make it to our organic waste management facilities. So next slide. Next slide, the recycling committee. So again, going fairly quick, I want to make sure I don't run out of time, but this committee was really instrumental with a lot of research that has been performed in determining that, obviously California has very unique markets for recyclable products. So we know that we have strict markets for paper and other products. You can see some of the percentages there, and also identifying what recycling really means and how it's handled in California as compared to others as well, and in other states. As you know, in California, in other states actually, the recycling, it's considered when sometimes you send recyclable material to things like cement kilns to burn or create diesel to burn in internal combustion cars. But this isn't illegal in California, so we can't have a plastics to fuel facility, and this is something that they're working with, not to make sure that continues, and we find a real solution to plastics, not just to burn them. Next line. So defining what's really recyclable per what's Sustainable Packaging Act, California Act. And making sure that it's cost effective and ways to, finding ways to improve collection and processing. It's part of what this committee is doing. Next slide, please. So they actually performed and deployed a really extensive survey of over 76 MRFs and the different materials they accepted, and with making sure what types of materials they're accepting. They also did a survey, recycling drop-off centers, interviewed MRF operators, perhaps some local, some perhaps maybe some that are in the audience now, and also studied the latest bill pricing of CRV material values. Next. So what they found throughout the state is that here are the type of products that actually pass the criteria of being recyclable, a list that we're probably pretty familiar with. But in the next slide please, you'll see that based on those findings, they recommend prohibiting non-compatible shrink sleeves for containers, for bottles, especially PET. A lot of these shrink wraps are and I don't know if it's happening at local MRFs, but sometimes MRFs, rather than figuring out if the container is glass, plastic, or sometimes even aluminum, they prefer just to grab it, put it and separate it out, and perhaps it even goes into the trash. Well, what's a simple solution there? Mandating that PET bottles are, and perhaps all bottles are provide their products in clear containers. So it's already being done in countries like South Korea and Japan. So that shouldn't be hard to do if you want to sell your products in one of the larger economies in the world. And also making sure that metal plastic components like lids are not included, because it's also not only harms equipment, but also makes it hard. It contaminates bottles and the loads and what we're trying to separate. Next slide, please. So now I'm very important because the messaging has to be consistent. The Label and Media and Education Committee came up with some of their findings and recommendations. Next slide. So making sure that the proper media, the proper labeling, to avoid contamination, because there's just way too many variables out there, and making sure that products are listed properly as recyclable or compostable in our stream. Next slide, please. So there is a lot of confusion, and that leads to contamination. You'll see that you have different messaging going out. I think we're fortunate that in our county, we work well together. We have shared campaigns, but throughout the state might not be the same, might not be the case, and information is sent in one city versus another, and there's a lot of confusion for users. Next slide. So just as an example, this county, Solano County, of less than 500,000 residents, there's 6 different options, acceptance lists. Fortunately, again, in San Diego, we have similar processors. Our lists don't really vary that much, but this is an example of how difficult it is for folks to understand what's recyclable, and sometimes just contaminating loads, and that's what's leading to a lot of our issues with the markets. Next slide. So again, the reality is that we depend on doesn't matter what part of the state, we really depend on the same end markets. And some of the stats there you see, whether it's being, the materials are being sent through brokers, consolidators, it pretty much reaches a lot of those same end markets. So we have to make sure we have a uniform programs that help these markets. Next slide. So again, the solution is simple, smart. The KISS, the keep it simple and smart, that works, and we need to strive for that. Next slide, please. So here's an example of keeping things consistent and streamlined. One of the things that I'm sure I'll reach some applause here is that we're recommending that the crossing, the typical recycling symbol with the crossing arrows or the following arrows that are just greenwashing everything, sometimes put on things that are not recyclable, go away. And I think there's already legislation that's been picked up and introduced to that effect. But we're still, this committee is still working on what will be the best options to replace those following arrows, and perhaps a simple R, and a little leaf with a C-shaped leaf that shows that that's a compostable product. It's really, really simple messaging up and down the state, that it's just easy to follow. Next slide. So going back to how you could follow some of the work of this very important work of this commission, the meetings are held every first and third Wednesday of the month from 9 to noon. And if you want to subscribe to the listservs and updates, there's the website there. There's also a way to provide your feedback, and a lot of these documents are held in a Google Drive, which is very accessible once you get into that website web page, and it's easy to follow. Next slide. That's what I was alluding to, the public comment portal. Again, it's in that website there, and you could easily just, it's a drop down. You could select statewide commission, and it leads you to to the comments. You could have a limited to 500 words or less, but only 150 words will be read in the meetings, because it just would take way too much time. But your comments do go on record, and they get posted on that Google Drive. Next slide. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you very much again for the invitation. That's my contact information. If you have any questions, I really do encourage you to follow what the work of this commission. We need feedback. Please make sure that your zero waste is well represented in some of this feedback as well. Thank you.